Nifty surged on hopes of Russia-Ukraine truce despite Putin's threat of nukes. India's benchmark stock index Nifty, NSEI, closed around 15,793.90 Monday. Surged almost plus 0.81% on hopes of a Russia-Ukraine truce despite Putin's threat of nukes. On Friday, Nifty jumped around plus 2.53% on signs of a truce between warring Russia and Ukraine after a report that Ukraine has agreed to negotiate with Russia to end the war. On early Monday, the Nifty made a panic low around 16,358.05 on terrible global cues as Russian President Putin virtually warned about a nuclear strike ahead of peace talks with Ukraine. Nifty recovered on hopes of an imminent truce after a report that Russia and Ukraine will meet later on Monday. On Sunday, Putin ordered a high-level alert for Russian nuclear deterrence forces. Putin instructed the Russian defense minister and chief of the general staff to put the Russian nuclear deterrence forces on high alert after aggressive statements from NATO leaders. You see that Western countries are not only unfriendly to our country in the economic sphere, I mean illegitimate sanctions. Senior officials of leading NATO countries also allow aggressive statements against our country. I order the defense minister and the chief of the general staff of the Russian armed forces to put the deterrence forces of the Russian army into a special mode of combat service. Just as the US or any other nuclear power country, a portion of Russian nuclear weapons are in constant readiness and can be launched within 10 minutes. This means that either the nuclear warheads are already mounted on missiles, or the bombs are already aboard bombers and submarines. Russia usually keeps almost 1,600 warheads deployed, i.e. in a war-ready condition. Since Russian strategic nuclear forces are always on alert, the real question is whether Putin has deployed more warheads on jets, bombers and submarines, or merely bluffing the world and putting pressure on Ukraine ahead of a crucial meeting. As per the report, during a phone call with Belarusian President Lukashenko, Ukraine's President Zelensky agreed the Ukrainian delegation would meet with the Russian delegation without preconditions on the Ukrainian-Belarusian border, near the Pripyat River. This meeting may happen Monday. Belarusian President Lukashenko has taken responsibility for ensuring that all planes, helicopters, and missiles stationed on Belarusian territory remain on the ground during the Ukrainian delegation's travel, talks, and return. Ukraine's foreign minister said, Putin's nuclear threat is an attempt to put pressure on Ukraine ahead of the negotiations with Russia. Putin's order came shortly after it was announced that the two delegations were ready to meet. We will not succumb to this pressure. Ukraine will not capitulate. We will be happy if the result of these negotiations is peace. But, and I emphasize this again, we will not give up, we will not capitulate, we will not give away a centimeter of our territory. What is happening now in Ukraine is a real people's war. We will not fall. We will not stop or get tired. We are determined to fight back fiercely as long as it is needed to defend our land and our people. We all must keep elevating pressure on Russia until it completely withdraws from Ukraine. War is the result of years of appeasement by West. NATO Secretary-General said, Russia's speech on putting its nuclear forces on standby is dangerous and irresponsible. Pentagon, US. Official said, Putin has put the nuclear deterrent forces on alert, which is an unnecessary and escalatory step. Our assessments are that Russia has started adopting siege tactics inside Ukraine, which is exacerbating the harm to people's lives. The fighting level in Kyiv is now low, with attacks slowed by Ukrainian resistance and fuel shortages. Russian progress in Ukraine is slow and Russia facing unexpected resistance from Ukraine. Our military assistance to Ukraine will not stop despite Putin's decision to raise the readiness of nuclear deterrence forces. Russian President Putin is now under huge pressure both at home and abroad. Russia is facing significant economic sanctions and is cut off from the SWIFT global remittance system except for selected banks, entities involved in oil and gas and other commodities export. Putin's popularity is now dwindling both at home and abroad despite his Iron Man image and nationalistic narrative for the Ukraine invasion, special military operation. Russian forces also have reportedly suffered unexpected casualties in Ukraine and thus Putin is now seeking an early end to Ukraine's special military operation. The cost of the Ukraine war is now escalating for Russia unexpectedly as the special military operation lingered beyond a few days. China, Israel, India, and some other influential Russian allies are also seeking an immediate end to the war with Ukraine and a resolution of the Russia-NATO security issues through dialogues. In the last few years, Putin brought back the Russian economy from the brink of collapse. Putin again placed Russia into a superpower not only on the military front but also on the economic front, and Russia is now virtually a debt-free country, thanks to huge revenue from oil and gas and other commodities. China is also helping Russia to become a modern and efficient economy. Putin's objective may be to topple the present anti-Russian Ukraine, Zelensky, government through military operation and establish a pro-Russian, puppet government in Ukraine, so that Ukraine does not become a NATO member, causing any military threat against Russia. In any way, G7 countries are not contemplating cutting off the West's access to Russian oil and natural gas. Since Russia is the second largest exporter of oil and natural gas after Saudi Arabia and UAE, that is a major relief to an already stressed commodities market and the broader economy. Increases in oil prices not only would push up headline inflation in the US and Europe, but they would also filter through to core inflation. Overall, except for oil and gas and some other commodities like nickel, steel, aluminum, fertilizer, lumber, and grains, wheat, corn, etc., Russia is a minor player in the global economy. There is not much significance from the global economy to Russia except on the geopolitical side. Thus G7 sanctions so far, including limited SWIFT restrictions, have a limited impact on US, global or even Russian economy. Europe is vulnerable to any export prohibition of Russian oil and gas. The US is partially dependent on Russian oil and gas. Prolonged elevated oil and gas, energy, prices may result in a stagflation-like scenario in Europe, whereas the US is less affected, and Russia may also supply deeply discounted oil and gas to its Asian allies like China and India. Putin has already lost the Ukraine war even if the Russian army secures Ukraine's capital Kyiv. Putin is now being seen as modern Hitler, and a madman, all over the world despite his reputation as a strong and decisive leader. Thus Putin is now seeking a face-saving exit from Ukraine in the face of Ukrainian resolve against Russian sophisticated weapons. There is also a question of Putin's mental health because, for the last few years, Putin may be making decisions on a geopolitical front of his own. Putin reportedly is not even trusting his inner circles, and the sudden decision to invade Ukraine rather than strategically damage targeted military facilities may have surprised his inner circle too. Russia, Putin is now suffering immense collateral damage from the Ukraine invasion. Putin is also now trying to control damage, and his tone is changing considering the huge impact on the Russian economy and financial market. But at the same time, the combination of higher USD/RUB and higher oil is good for the Russian economy. Russia is a major exporter of commodities, especially oil and gas. Europe is heavily dependent on Russian oil and gas. Although this is great leverage for Putin for his aggressive act of war on Ukraine, both Russia and Europe need each other. The worst of the Russia-Ukraine geopolitical crisis may be over as Russia launched the much-awaited and feared Ukraine invasion, while NATO, US, will not punish Russia either through militarily or harsh sanctions. For example, US or NATO's harsh sanctions will not target Russia's major commodities export, including oil and gas. As there is no major sanction on Russia which could affect the global or even Russian economy significantly, Wall Street recovers, while oil and gold stumbles. Putin is now showing a willingness to negotiate with Ukraine after the Chinese president and close ally Xi's request. China's foreign ministry said that China pushes Russia and Ukraine to have talks as soon as possible. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi said China has a clear position on respecting the territorial integrity and sovereignty of all countries, including Ukraine. Putin's Ukraine invasion movement may be a well-thought and well-timed strategy, considering the already elevated price of energy, oil and gas, and European dependence on Russian oil and gas. But at the same time, China is also a big consumer, importer of energy. And elevated oil and gas would be negative for China's economy. This is also true for the world's third largest oil consumer, importer India, which is another close ally of Russia. China, the world's second largest economy and the global manufacturing powerhouse, is also keen to ensure no global recession or trading disruption after COVID, due to lingering military conflict in Europe. And it's a great opportunity for China to increase its global influence when US and Europe are suffering from weak and indecisive political leadership. Thus, Chinese President Xi, who has a strategic friendship and great influence on Putin, took the initiative for an imminent truce between Russia and Ukraine. Both Europe and the US are the biggest export destinations for China, and thus China also wants to ensure stable geopolitical conditions and economy on both sides of the Atlantic irrespective of the Russian narrative. China will keep good relations with both Europe and US for its economic interest. But now it seems that Europe, NATO is not too much interested in an immediate truce between Russia and Ukraine for their political interest. French President Macron warned of a prolonged conflict between Russia-Ukraine. NATO is now increasingly helping Ukraine with military weapons to fight Russia along with fuel, funds, and other humanitarian assistance. Ukrainian President Zelensky's image is now improving from a comedian to a nationalistic hero, who urged military assistance and grants from the US rather than a free ride outside the country, evacuation. NATO has also a responsibility to ensure peace and stability between Russia and Ukraine by addressing the Russian concern for long-term security properly rather than forcing a nuclear superpower, Russia, into an all-out war with Ukraine. There is immense uncertainty despite signs of truce between Russia and Ukraine, coupled with the fact that till now Russian commodity export, especially oil and gas, is not put under severe sanction. But various countries, global banks including Chinese banks and ports, are now taking precautionary steps in dealing with consignment involving Russian commodities. Thus, we may see renewed risk-off sentiment in the coming days if there is a lingering military conflict between Russia-Ukraine despite hopes of an imminent truce. On Monday, the Indian market was boosted by metals. Western sanction may affect Russian metal, steel export, beneficial for Indian producers, energy, oil and gas, elevated prices of oil and higher spreads, infra, techs, higher USD/INR, media, FMCG, realty, MNC, pharma, PSU banks. Government may support recaps for weak banks, service, while dragged by automobiles, higher room costs, supply chain disruption, and selected private banks. Nifty was boosted by ICICI Bank, NS, ICBK, HDFC Bank, NS, HDBK, RIL, HDFC, NS, HDFC, TCS, NS, TCS, INFY, Bajaj Finance, Axis Bank, NS, AXBK, Kotak Bank, Tata Motors, NS, TAMO, SBI, NS, SBI, ITC, NS, ITC, Tata Steel, NS, TISC, BAJAJFIN Service and Bharti Airtel, NS, BRTI. What's next for India's Nifty? If Russian risk continues and the Ukraine war dragged beyond Monday, this may result in oil well over $120 along with higher USD and commodities, and it will be negative for the Indian economy, resulting in higher imported inflation. Apart from inflation, Indian export and import, external trade, may also hurt along with FDI. But as India is a largely domestic-oriented service economy, import-heavy, looking ahead apart from oil and gas vulnerability, there is not much significance for the Indian economy. Moreover, India is now enjoying a scarcity premium among M space on the appeal of political, policy and macro stability. This, coupled with strong political leadership by PM Modi, the mantra of reform and performance, and the attraction of 5D, democracy, demography, demand, deregulation, and digitalization, India is now an attractive destination for both FDI and FPIs. Thus any unusual volatility may be also a great opportunity to invest in Indian blue chips having a good business model, strong balance sheet, and credible management. Technically, whatever may be the narrative, Nifty Futures, MAR, now has to sustain over 16,050 for any meaningful rally to 16,200 and 16,425 to 16,675, 16,775 and 16,850, 16,975 to 17,175, 17,400 in the coming days. On the flip side, sustaining below 15975, the Nifty may further fall to 15,800 and 15,450 to 15,225, 15,000 in the coming days if the Russian risk continues.